Sajid, I think should we go?
Honor in welcoming our faculty for today, Dr. Nilesh Mohan, and I also welcome the moderator for today's session, Dr. Sagar Bhargav. Dr. Sagar Bhargav himself was a faculty in this session and had made a presentation also, and today he is the moderator. Dr. Nilesh Mohan is a senior faculty and professor at Regional Institute of Ophthalmology in Patna, in Bihar. And I would like to request Dr. Sagar Bhargav to please introduce him and his topics, please.
Thank you well for this lecture. He's been very gracious to accept a last-minute addition in the program today, and he really accepted our request. We're very thankful to him. Nilesh is essentially, he's done his postgraduate training in RP Center in 1999. Then he did senior residency in Cornea, and then post PG he has almost 19 years of experience. He's working as additional professor and in charge of iBank as well as serving as editor of Bihar Journal of Ophthalmology. He's secretary of Patna Ophthalmics. His member is EBAI. He has been credited with many publications in national and international journals. He's life member of various organizations in ophthalmology. He has hosted 9th Annual Conference on Cornea and Eye as an organizing secretary at RIO. He's been actively involved in the executive body of iBank Association of India and has held many promotional activities of iBanking with different NGOs. He has been continuously imparting training to RIO to fellow colleagues and other medical colleges to enhance and promote corneal transplantation in the state. And I believe he is the first to perform a corneal transplant in Bihar in 2014. It's a great distinction. He has been a life member of various scientific bodies, just to name a few: All India Ophthalmic Society, DOS, Bihar Ophthalmic Society, Patna Ophthalmic Society, American Academy of Ophthalmology, and then the Indian Society of Cornea and Refractive Surgeons. So I welcome Dr. Nilesh and I hand over to him to start this on ASOCT.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. So should we start with which topic should I take up first, Satyajit? Because
I would like to inform the postgraduates that we had a presentation on anterior segment OCT, which was to be presented by Dr. Bhaskar Srinivas, but his daughter was not well, and is not well, so he could not present that day. So Dr. Nilesh has been kind enough to accept to present that, because we want the whole all the topics to be completed for the postgraduates. So Dr. Nilesh was very kind to accept this, and we would like to request him to first present on anterior segment OCT, and then he will be talking on his topic, which is for today, peripheral corneal degenerations. Dr. Nilesh, please.
Thank you, Satyajit. I mean, it was a last-minute addition. Unfortunately, I went through my slides and saw it. I think it should be beneficial for the postgraduates. So welcome you all. And I'll be starting with anterior segment. I'll be mainly focusing on the clinical applications of the anterior segment OCT. So just to brief it, way back in 1994, ISAT had usually...
Can you please minimize this small window in your screen?
Oh, this has to be minimized. Okay, fine.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. So it was way back in 1994 when ISAT et al. Introduced this technology, and since OCT, as we all very frequently use it, it is a non-contact technology. We know it. It produces very high resolution cross-sectional images, something like a live histological images, and it enables us to give a precise visualization of the anterior segment structures in many clinical disorders. Longer wavelength of light is used in retinal OCT. Around 830 nanometers or to 1310 nanometers are used. Better penetration through the sclera is also there. There is a small comparison there is the other modality along with OCT is the UBM, which is of our clinical support in various diseases. So in UBM has got a slight advantage in hazy medias, because in those cases you would not have ASOCT that much. But definitely UBM has got its own advantages in certain situations. So this chart basically can help you to compare between the anterior segment OCT and the UBM, which is used very frequently in our day-to-day clinical practice. So this is the principle. Basically, you have an aiming beam. This is all a technical part of it. And what we see is the image display, which comes out after whole thing happens inside the machine. But the acquisition time in the newest generation OCTs is too short and the resolution is very high. The majority of the applications which are being done for OCT is in corneal and ocular surface diseases, in anterior segment surgeries, in glaucoma cases. So we have a wider application, and it is day by day different diseases and different applications in different diseases are going on. So coming to the ocular, corneal and ocular surface diseases, it helps in corneal thickness assessment and monitoring in corneal edema after even graft rejection or post-operatively, or for any IOP correction in glaucoma where you don't have much of a visualization. This is a photograph just to show Descemet detachment. OCT helps in identifying the Descemet detachment, because in the initial phase, you have a edema, you cannot visualize the internal structures, whether actually you have caused the Descemet detachment or how up to what extent it is. So this becomes of an immense use in these situations. Anterior segment OCT is also helpful in assessing the depth of the opacity to plan a surgery or to plan the management of that particular disease. So if there is an opacity, whether you would like a superficial intervention or you want to go for an intervention which requires full thickness correction procedures. So it helps in assessing the depth of the opacity in detail so that you can make your decisions wisely. In post-operative situations, in DALK is usually where your host, it is a, I would say, component keratoplasty, whereby the anterior lamella is, transplanted. So in those cases, there are certain situations that the adhesion of the lenticule is not that much. So whether you have some viscoelastic inside, a remnant viscoelastic. So if you have some kind of a double anterior chamber formation, so you can plan what to intervene and how to intervene. If it's a small one, you may not intervene. If it's a larger one, it won't resolve. So this gives you a judicious approach once you have this at hand. In cases of bullous keratopathy, where you have a desec, where you have done the just the reverse. Now the posterior lenticule is there. Now whether there is a proper graft host adhesion or not, whether there is any separation in between. So you get a wide view, and whether the edema, if the edema is also not resolving, whether the thickness is more. So this all gives you a clinical prognosis initially and what it will go later on. So it helps you a lot in those cases. In cases of intrastromal implants, intrastromal segments implants, it basically helps you in judging where the depth of the placement of the implant. So OCT becomes a high resolution image, definitely gives you an advantage to that in cases of each and every procedure which you are performing. Even you can quantify all those things in various other conditions like pellucid marginal degeneration. If you have confusion with any other entity, you can look into whether the corneal protrusion is there or not. It's very distinctly observed in the anterior segment OCT. As in Terrien's marginal degeneration, you will find there is no peripheral thinning. So this can be your clinic. It can be an aid to your clinical judgment or clinical diagnosis, which you have seen on the slit lamp. In cases of keratitis, you can assess or monitor the corneal thinning which is happening, whether this is going to perforate, impending perforation cases. So follow-up and management of bacterial keratitis is also helped by frequent imaging of anterior segment OCT. Now, in cases of conjunctival intraepithelial squamous neoplasia, you will have a distinct pattern and find an epithelial thickening with a normal underlying stroma. Now, this was one of the things which you have a typical pattern which you find in OCT, a normal pattern, and whether there is a change in the pattern which you see in the anterior segment OCT. So it defines whether the it is progressing into a malignant variety or it's a benign one. So that helps you a lot in without any intervention. Cases of conjunctival nevus also. The cysts and well-defined posterior limit, these define the posterior limit of the lesion. So in nevus has got a different pattern, and with a neoplastic or a malignant transformation in the nevus has got a different pattern. So this helps in those situations. Same in cases of limbal cysts also, you can very clearly see that and see the patterns. You can even identify the hydrops in pellucid marginal degeneration, whether it is happening or not clinically, you are able to distinguish, but yes, you can definitely ascertain in these situations. The occurrence of bullous keratopathy in keratoplasty secondary to graft rejection. It's visible, maybe it may be visible on slit lamp, or you may be confused that this is just a corneal opacity, but a distinct appearance on OCT confirms that yes, you are going in the right direction. In other corneal ocular surface diseases, pterygium. Now, if there is some kind of transformation happening under surface of the pterygium, a normal finding of the pterygium shows certain pattern of the epithelial thickness, and this thickening goes on increasing in intraepithelial squamous neoplasia. So these are all helpful. I mean, definitely when you keep on looking the anterior segments OCT in repeated number of cases, then you ascertain that. Maybe you can decide in which cases you want to go in for a intervention, early biopsy or something of that sort. This one is showing that you are following up of a case of a resolving hydrops and see how fairly it's resolving. Moreover, now in cases of foreign body, whether to touch this foreign body in the OPD, or if it is penetrated quite deep inside, and while you're touching it in the OPD, maybe that you can perforate and you may require some assistance. So just doing an OCT as helps you to guide that yes, whether I can intervene this patient in the OPD and take out the foreign body, or this requires. So the depth of penetration through and through or not, or when it is through and through, it's very clear in the slit lamp, but when it's partially, you can have it on this a view on the slit lamp, but definitely this guides you a lot when you're on anterior segment OCT. Nowadays, intraoperative OCT is being used during DALC, what we discussed earlier. And it's a very procedure which is the centers which are using this, they find it very useful. It's guided. It's not your procedure doesn't become based upon assumptions that yes, things have okay. You can dynamically see that yes, there is no viscoelastic left in between the interface or something of that sort. So this intraoperative OCT, when this is in a dynamic phase, you can very well see that whether the lenticule is placed or not. You can simultaneously apply more, inject more air and put more pressure, so these things are very, very helpful. Technologically, this aids a lot during the surgery. Now, in cases of LASIK also, evaluation of the flap is very meticulously done, and once the performance of the microkeratome or the femtosecond laser is actually quantified by the anterior segment OCT. So there are a lot of uses. So you can definitely pre-surgically plan, have a post-surgical evaluation, and follow up the patients in cornea and refractive surgery. So I would say that in the anterior segment OCT is definitely helping us in many of the common corneal problems which we are facing day in and day out. Now in glaucoma, where we find angle closure, I'm just discussing about the clinical implications where we encounter day to day. So you can have this pattern of iris bowing, and then you can identify why the patient is having an angle closure. You have done a PI and you can have a transillumination through this and ascertain that yes, the PI is patent, but yes, on OCT you see that there are certain strands and the PI is not patent, so that requires a little bit of a shot. So see how helpful this becomes at this juncture, where clinically you can be quite sure that this PI is working. Now in cases of microspherophakia and lens-induced anterior rotation of iris, it gives you a beautiful picture how to plan and see post-operatively the things, how the angle opens up just once the lens is removed and things are in place. In malignant glaucoma also, you can have a pre-evaluation, see how this thing is so close, and now you can see after the control of the pressure and the whole iris lens diaphragm has shifted back. So anterior segment has got pre-operative to assess as well as follow up how the patient is behaving. In cases of plato iris configuration, definitely it helps you where to intervene and gives you an exact idea of the situation. In case of reverse pupillary block, the pattern is very well defined, which you can just ascertain clinically, but once this kind of a picture comes up, then you think in terms of your mind goes in that way, and then you come up to certain diagnosis and intervene accordingly. Cases of iridociliary cysts, and which leads to focal angle closure. This may not be a case of a classical angle closure glaucoma, but a pathology which is causing a focal angle closure. So that has to be dealt, and this can be very nicely picked up on anterior segment OCT. In cases of post-operative follow-up of glaucoma patients, whether the bleb is working or not, which is a cystic bleb, whether needling has been done, whether after the needling, whether the bleb is formed or not. So you can get an idea of a post-operative assessment. Now, in these kind of cases, in shunt procedures where you have an edematous graft, so you're not sure whether the graft edema is basically due to the shunt tubing touching the cornea, or it's basically a graft failure or a graft rejection. So this helps you, because at that point of time the anterior segment haze is there and you're not able to visualize very clearly. That point of time ASOCT helps you a lot, and just this gives you a picture that no, it's not touching. So we have to, the management, it specifies your management. In pre and post cataract surgery, planning of in cases of primary angle closure glaucoma, this becomes very helpful, because many a times angle closure is there in cases of cataract, which causes a narrowing and shallowing of the angle, and once the cataract surgery is done, the angle becomes open. So I would say that anterior segment OCT has got a wide range of corneal, conjunctival pathologies, as well as in pre-operative cases or post-operative cases of glaucoma, and wide range of conditions where we can very decisively use this. Now its use is so rampant just because it's very quick and rapid. It's a non-invasive technique, easily can be trained and done by technicians also, and you can interpret that, and definitely it's easy for the doctor and the patient comfort. So these all add on to its use, and you try to find out other uses in many procedures which you are refining. So since it is giving you a high resolution images, and it's a non-invasive procedure, so its use definitely is going to increase, and maybe whatever pathologies right now we are focusing upon, the whole I would say armamentarium may increase in future. So thank you with it for the first part. Am I?
hear you, sir.
The voice is not coming very clear. May I come up with the second presentation?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So now I would switch over to the peripheral corneal degenerations. This was the topic assigned to me. So I would go into discussions with the degeneration. So starting with, what does a corneal degeneration mean? Corneal degeneration is basically referring to a condition where there is a deterioration resulting in an impaired function and structure of the affected tissue. So usually the normal cells undergo some degenerative changes, which may be under the influence of age, or it may be due to some pathological conditions like various kind of deposits, trauma, or environmental factor, etc. So that the corneal degeneration in conjunctiva, degeneration, whatever. So this is the general thing which is about the degenerative thing which is happening over there. So what is the characteristics of these corneal degenerations in general? Usually it occurs as a later onset, has got a variable rate of progression, usually in peripheral in location, and it's associated with neovascularization or inflammation, or may not be. We have a quick comparison between the entities we find as dystrophies and degeneration. This is an important thing for the postgraduates usually, because these things come in. So whatever which I have defined over here has got exceptions also. So dystrophies usually are bilateral, symmetrical. They have an occurrence of age slightly earlier than the degenerations. There is definitely a strong family history found in dystrophies. The site of involvement is usually central, not peripheral, and vascularization part is usually negative. So these are the broad categories which you can differentiate between dystrophies and degeneration, though there are certain exceptions when you individually go into different varieties. Usually we classify anatomically depending upon locations: the axial corneal degenerations, the fatty degeneration, the hyaline degeneration, various amyloid deposits, the amyloidosis, the calcific degeneration, also commonly is known as the band-shaped keratopathy, which abbreviation BSK is used commonly, the Salzmann's nodular degeneration. And the other peripheral degenerations are the arcus senilis, the Vogt's white limbal girdle, Hassel-Henle bodies, band keratopathies, Dellen, Terrien's marginal degeneration. I would name Moran's ulcer also over here, pellucid marginal degeneration, furrow degeneration, and the Salzmann's nodular degeneration. I would not go into too much of details of everyone, but yes, I would definitely focus upon the common ones. Now, depending upon the etiology, most commonly the age-related ones are the arcus senilis, the Vogt's white limbal girdle, Hassel-Henle bodies, and the mosaic degeneration. And the pathological degeneration includes the fatty ones, the amyloidosis. It itself implicates that there is certain pathology which is associated with it: Salzmann's, furrows, spheroidal, pellucid, and Terrien's. Now, most commonly what we encounter is the age-related one, and the most common among them becomes the arcus senilis, which we encounter. This is usually an annular lipid infiltration of the corneal periphery, commonly known as gerontoxin. Sometimes these kind of changes are associated with hyperlipidemia, but that may not be a must. Usually it is found in more than 40 years of age, and by the age of 80, 100% of people have it. It is more common in males, and it has been known to be associated with dyslipidemia. In peripheral corneal stroma at the level of Bowman's membrane and Descemet membrane, you can find these deposits. The initial signs are, you can find that this kind of arc is seen initially inferior and then in a superior arc, and then they progress circumferentially to form in an annular form, and with a central border diffuse peripheral sharp edge. But there is a zone of separation from the extreme periphery. Now, if these things occur at an earlier age, less than 40 years, then these should be evaluated for atherosclerosis or vascular diseases. Now, as a matter of fact, age-related changes in cornea also occur. There is a decreased transparency, increase in the refractive index, change in the astigmatic pattern. So these degenerative changes add upon to that. What I was telling about, that the clear zone of Vogt, that you will have a distinct separation, a clear zone over here when you see an arcus sinalis, which gives you a diagnosis along with all those things. Now the pathology is usually there is an oxidation and glycation of LDL causing a damage to the vascular endothelium and thereby infiltration of lipids from the limbal vessels. Usually you can find this kind of a juvenile arcus known as the anterior embryotoxon, usually in children, and in these cases you have incidence of familial hyperlipidemia, or in cases of blue sclera and megalocornea. These patients have to be definitely seen for a close watch for different systemic abnormalities. Pseudogerontoxin is another entity only found in the deposits and only in the anterior stroma. Changes are due to inflammation at the limbus, mostly found in vernal or the atopic keratoconjunctivitis. Now the next entity is the Vogt's white limbal girdle. This is usually a crescentic kind of a appearance. Where is the cursor? Yeah, crescentic kind of an appearance. This is an elastotic degeneration which you will see usually in the nasal or the temporal area, and the opacity is at the level of the Bowman's membrane and anterior stroma, mostly in the age group of 40 to 60 years, and mostly seen in the interpalpebral area. Two forms are seen because type 1 has got a perilimbal clear zone. So type 1 variety will have a perilimbal clear zone, and type 2 will have no clear zone. It will be completely over here. And type 1 has got an association with band-shaped keratopathy. It becomes a precursor. And type 2 is associated with generally UV exposure. So this is one kind of a degenerative around the corneal periphery originating from am I audible? Around the corneal periphery originating from the Descemet's membrane. And this is seen as one of the most common senile changes in the cornea. Usually what we see on specular reflection, tiny dark spots on the central epithelium and central endothelium, because once the excretion cells invade the central area, this condition is called as a corneal guttae. So these are very common ones, degenerative changes seen protruding from the Descemet membrane. Now coming to the pathological variety. This is one of the degenerative change which we encounter very commonly. Is the band-shaped keratopathy, calcific degeneration. It is basically a degenerative change which is associated with deposition of salts in Bowman's membrane, in the most superficial part of stroma and in the deeper layers of the epithelium. So the etiology of this band-shaped keratopathy, because it is seen in association with chronic uveitis in adults or in children with Still's disease, in phthisis bulbi conditions, chronic glaucoma, chronic keratitis, and post-ocular trauma. So these are all chronic conditions whereby there has been a sustained inflammation and the eye is gone down. So these incidents of BSK is seen in these all conditions. Age-related BSK is common and affects otherwise healthy cornea also. There are certain metabolic conditions which may be rarely associated with band-shaped keratopathy, included hypercalcemia. Clinical pattern is very typically presenting as a Swiss cheese pattern. This is the later phase. The earlier phase may be just a band also in the interpalpebral zone with a clear interval between the ends of the band and the limbus. The condition usually begins at the periphery and gradually progresses towards the center. Now the management initially, if it does not affect the vision much, if it is in the lower than the visual axis, not affecting much, then it can leave, but chemical removal by chelating agents, by EDTA can be done, or use of phototherapeutic keratectomy is of use in these cases, or in worst cases you can go in for keratoplasty. But since these are those kind of cases where the visual prognosis is not much, so you go with the conservative measures. Where you have better visual prognosis, definitely then only you think of going for keratoplasty. Now this is one condition, Dellen. Dellen, this is an ellipse concentric to the limbus and occurs temporarily with clearly defined edges. It is caused by localized evaporation and corneal dehydration of the corneal stroma, and the areas of limbal elevation. There are areas of limbal elevation in this due to the break and tear film. So there is a stromal thinning in these conditions, but without any tissue loss. These conditions can be seen post-operatively. Also, you can encounter in many patients these kind of situations. Now, they can be asymptomatic also, or they can present with a foreign body sensation, but these may be a transient lesion also if it's subtle. So the signs are small saucer-like excavations with a well-defined border, central edges deep, and limbal walls slope gradually, and the overlying epithelium is intact because of the pooling of fluorescein which you can see. So usually the treatment is conservative with lubricants, or in more cases you can use BCL or low-dose steroids. So this is one of kind of a degenerative change which is seen. Now coming to one of the important ones is the Terrien's marginal degeneration. This is a non-ulcerative thinning of the marginal cornea, commonly known as the gutter dystrophy, occurs commonly in the age group of 20 to 40 years. First appears superonasally, then progresses circumferentially, and 15% of these Terrien's marginal degeneration go for perforation from mild trauma. Etiologically occurs in men who work outdoors, typically in hostile climate, and its occurrence has been related to exposure to UV rays. Histologically, there is a loss of Bowman's layer and anterior stromal lamella. There is a stromal fibrillar degeneration which is seen, and there is a lipid infiltration in the collagen fibrils. It is usually bilateral, progresses asymmetrically. Now, fine yellow punctate stromal opacities occur which progress to thinning and eventually forming the gutter. There may be mild superficial vascularization overlying it. The epithelium is intact. There may be corneal eye drops associated with it. And against the rule, astigmatism remains spherical if it is completely circumferential. Otherwise, it changes the astigmatic pattern. And you can observe this as a bow tie appearance in corneal topography. Now, what to do in these patients? You need to see whether if the patient requires improvement of vision or requires any tectonic support. Earlier refractive treatment includes correction with spectacles or with contact lens. RGP lenses are used in these, or RGP can be used over the piggyback lenses. So you have to determine what to intervene. If there is a corneal edema, medical management is required, and if the perforation is imminent, then surgical intervention either by a conjunctival flap or suturing of the furrows, or an extensive penetrating keratoplasty, whether it be lamellar or a complete, is to be done. So when we are discussing these Terriens, we definitely I would like to focus on the Murren's ulcer. It's an idiopathic, progressive, but an inflammatory, immune-mediated thinning of the peripheral cornea, manifests as chronic serpiginous ulceration of peripheral cornea. Two types are there. Adults respond well to therapy, but the young ones are very aggressive and they're poorly responsive. Now, ulcer is contiguous with the limbus without any intervening clear zone. And there is an overhanging advanced edge, which is very typical of the Murren's ulcer. So you can see this in photograph, and it's a painful condition. Now, treatment is to stop the inflammatory process. So aggressive use of steroids, because once there is a pathology in the cornea, people are hesitant to use definitely steroids and must be hesitant in other conditions. But you need to identify that, yes, this is a Moehrens ulcer and steroids will definitely work in these. Excising the perilimbal conjunctiva is of importance in severe cases. Cryotherapy is also required, or a tectonic support as a last resort in worst cases. Pellucid marginal degeneration. This is a rare progressive peripheral corneal thinning, commonly occurring in the age group of 20 to 40 with no hereditary transmission and equal occurrence in males and females. It's usually bilateral and there's an inferior corneal thinning. The most common position is around 4 to 8 o'clock, 1 to 2 millimeter from the limbus. The epithelium overlying is always intact and acute height drops here is rare. Contrasting to keratoconus and terians, whereby the corneal protrusion is there in the thinned area of the cornea, here the corneal protrusion is superior to the thinning, which can be seen in your topographic patterns. Severely reduced uncorrected visual acuity that cannot be corrected with spherocylinder lens is also one of the finding in these kind of cases. Pinhole vision may be good. Diagnostic procedures, as I said, corneal topography helps you to show different types and patterns of the astigmatic shift and thinning of the cornea also. Protrusion of the cornea, the level of the corneal thinning. These are all quantified by the diagnostic procedures. Because of the abnormal corneal topography, the treatment becomes also difficult. So, recent study has found that around 88% of pellucid degenerative cases were managed non-surgically with spectacles or combination with contacts and spectacles, and less number of patients underwent penetrating keratoplasty. As in other degenerations or in severe cases where there is impending perforations or situations requiring surgical intervention, eccentric penetrating keratoplasty, wedge resection of the tissue, and even collagen cross-linking has been of help in these conditions. Furrow degeneration is a senile marginal degeneration. It's an appearance of peripheral thinning in the lucid interval of the corneal arcus. The epithelium over here is intact, no inflammation, vascularization, or a tendency to perforate. Usually no treatment is required. So a quick comparison between the common ones, the pellucid, terians, Moehrens, and the furrow. The age of onset of pellucid is second and fifth decade. Terians, middle-aged to elderly are affected. In Moehrens, adult to elderly are there. Younger ones are more permanent. Furrow, you have elderly. Usually, pellucid and terian is bilateral. Moehrens, you can have unilateral and bilateral types. Furrow is bilateral. You have male and female equal preponderance in pellucid and furrows, but you have male preponderance in terians and Moehrens. Astigmatism is very common in pellucid and terians. Sometimes you can find in Moehrens also. In furrows, you don't have. Now, thinning, as we usually saw, that there is a typical pattern, inferior band 4 to 8 o'clock, 1 to 2 millimeter wide, 1 to 2 millimeters from the limbus. In terians, usually starts supranasally. In Moehrens, it starts within lid fissures, and in furrow occurs within the eye arcus. So these are all very common differentiating points clinically. When you can see there is no inflammation in the pellucid and furrow. Occasionally you can find here in terians, but it's typical in Moehrens. Epithelial defect is none in pellucid or furrows, usually not in terians also, but it's very typical in Moehrens. You will have an epithelial defect. Vascularization not found in the pellucids or the furrows, but the vascularization in terians crosses the area of thinning, and here it's in the peripheral edge of the thinning. Lipid deposition is not seen in pellucid. In terians, it's very common, and in furrows, it's in the arcus. So these were the common distinguishing features which you could see. And coming to the last and common one, which is one of the Salzmann's nodular degeneration. This is uncommon, non-inflammatory, slowly progressive. It may be unilateral or bilateral. Usually the pathogenesis, which is said, is due to androgen deficiency, more commonly in females, and associated with meibomian gland diseases and dry eye. Etiologically, it may be idiopathic, but this condition occurs in eyes with recurrent attacks of flictenular keratitis, rosacea keratitis, trachoma, measles, or interstitial keratitis also. Clinically, mostly involves the mid-periphery of the cornea. Patient may experience discomfort due to loss of epithelium from the surface of the nodule. There may be a loss of epithelium from the surface of the nodule, which impinges on the central zone. And definitely, I said earlier that there is a female preponderance of this condition. The signs what we observe is a grayish-white nodule measuring 1 to 3 millimeters seen anterior to Bauman's layer. So they are classically round and located in mid-periphery. Histologically, they are raised hyaline plaques deposited between epithelium and Bauman's membrane. There is associated destruction of the Bauman's membrane and adjacent stroma, and as well as thinning and maybe an epithelial loss may be there above the nodule. And it stains by PS, and the eosinophilic material may replace the Bauman's and may mimic a basement membrane. So a duplication of a basement membrane kind of a picture may be seen in this degeneration histologically. Treatment of these kind of degeneration is usually symptomatic, because lubrication helps in majority of the conditions, or in some patients steroids or a use of oral doxycycline because of the etiology of the meibomian gland disease is helpful. To improve the visual acuity and to decrease the astigmatism, you can resort to superficial keratorectomy, whereby the nodules are removed and the patient is comfortable with that only. A certain group of patients require keratoplasty when the nodules are extensive, encroaching into the pupillary zone much more than its usual location. Then only you go in for a penetrating keratoplasty, and that becomes the definitive procedure. So hereby I have tried to compile majority of the common peripheral degenerations, which were I think of importance, clinical importance for majority of the postgraduates. Certain other degenerations which are there just have to be seen, but these are the common ones which require special attention and have to be focused upon. Thank you. Your voice is cracking. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I can listen, but the voice is not clear.
Okay. So there are some questions.
अगर आवाज नहीं आ रही तुम्हारा,
आवाज नहीं आ रही है. Am I clear, Satyajit?
एकदम crystal clear, but we can barely hear Sagar.
Sagar, I can't hear. I mean, was it audible throughout?
Absolutely, एकदम perfectly audible. So till Sagar's audio is restored, I'll read out a question. Sir, you showed in one picture ciliary cyst in anterior segment OCT, but OCT cannot penetrate in the iris layer. So in ciliary cyst, what to use, UBM or ASOCT?
Which photograph? Let me go back.
Ciliary cyst.
It was a conjunctival cyst. Ciliary cyst was not there. Limbal cysts.
Limbal cyst.
These are not ciliary cysts. Okay, that explains the question.
Yes.
Because the OCT cannot penetrate beyond the iris or ciliary body, so UBM becomes of more importance in these conditions like ciliary body tumors, melanomas. UBM becomes more important in those situations, because I just had a comparison of the advantage of OCT and UBM. So you can see over here that can image through opaque corneas, and this is one of the advantage of UBM, and the second is that where it cannot penetrate, so that beyond the iris and ciliary body, definitely UBM becomes of significance in the entry segment part.
Sir, does pterygium cause against the rule astigmatism or with the rule astigmatism?
I would say they should answer it. This is, I think, if the postgraduate need to be at that level. So commonly, what do we have? With the rule is there, with age, what happens is against the rule is there going to happen. So pterygium is pulling. So what's going to happen? So I think this question must be answered by the postgraduates themselves. What do you say, Sagar? This is
Absolutely.
they need to know it.
Especially after a topography class.
Because topography does helps you and adds on to what you are seeing clinically in certain situations or certain blind situations, like as I said, in post-operative evaluation of the corneal edema, Descemet detachment, touching of the glaucoma shunt onto the cornea or not. Those are distinct advantages. Or in DALC, residual viscoelastics, pleb formation in the glaucoma cases. This gives you distinction in your clinical approach. But in rest of the condition, it becomes as an add-on. It convinces you, documents, as well as gives you a crystal clear picture. In oculoplasty cases, which we have been seeing, I mean, oculoplasty people, colleagues at my place, what they are doing also, because Dr. Santosh Honavar had shown few slides so beautifully, and after that we tried to follow up, and that needs a close watch. Maybe you have seen that it is a nevus. Now you will have to take an effort to go and do the OCT and see that this is a benign nevus, and when there is a transformation, how the pattern and the things go on. So this is of real help. Once it comes into documentation, then non-invasively also very well you can tell that this one is going to be malignant. So you better be care of and plan. So it changes your decision, or it helps you in your management protocol.
One of the advantages that you were saying of anterior segment OCT was in corneal surgeries, especially all the endothelium attachment. And I wanted to share one of my experience. In my 20 years of experience, in one cataract surgery, I was doing the last part hydration, and I had an endothelial detachment. And I was not very sure whether it was an endothelial detachment or not. And I took the patient to the anterior segment OCT, and I clearly see the endothelial detached. And I took back the patient and I put air, and next day I saw it was totally attached. So that was one real advantage of anterior segment OCT. Even you can relate it to cataract surgery also, for the different complications that happen. So all these tools, though it's very something to say that during post-graduation, one is all thinking about how to set up a practice. And these ophthalmic tools are so costly that it is beyond the imagination of a postgraduate passing out and buying a OCT. But these are things which will be shown to you in the exams, which you should know about and which you should have an idea of. And slowly, God willing, as you progress in life, you will be going to institutes which have these, and you have it in your hospitals, and you will have it in your practice also.
I think OCT will be that kind of a tool, definitely. That I mean, it is so easy to use for the doctor and so convenient for the patient, and helping you in so many variety of conditions that I mean, you need to know, and you need to acquire, and you need to be conversant with that nowadays. Now you can see that OCT angio is coming. So from an invasive part to a non-invasive interpretation. So though there is a role of invasive methodology at certain points, but definitely you have to focus in this segment, OCT, anterior segment as well as posterior segment.
So there are a couple of more questions. So can you show scarred cornea on ASOCT? How does it look like?
Unfortunately, I don't have the snap of definitely scarred cornea. I can have a.
Yeah.
I can go through that. Scarred, I didn't take the photograph of the scarred one, but definitely once, because since we are concerned with the thinning area, see, you can see this is not a scar. See, the thinning is here, and now the thinning after the healing. Okay, it's not a perforating part. At least this one of the photograph has shown that yes, there was a keratitis, there was a healing, but the healing is not with the full thickness. There is a remnant thinning also. So scarred will have a high reflectance, but in an isolated way, I haven't shown that. Otherwise, I would have shown you the pictures of 3-4 different varieties of scarred corneas.
Correct. So there is another question which I think you have shown in the table: how to differentiate Moeren's ulcer from PMD.
Yeah. That was a very very good slide I found. I mean,
that is a self-explanatory slide. If this
yeah.
presentation will be
See,
available
because the
online,
common one which confuses you,
Yeah.
the common one
Yeah.
actually, this
this
slide.
yeah, correct. Yeah,
This one was
I
very
think this is
relevant, and
one
these are the
slide
conditions
shows everything.
from whom you confuse actually. So that way only is very explanatory. I mean, the PGs can have a snapshot of this one, and this is a authentic one. So they can definitely keep that in mind and remember it in their own way. So this is a very important one.
A slight deviation from the topic. Somebody has asked how to manage significant DM detachment after cataract surgery.
How to
manage DM detachment?
DM detachment, definitely. If it's a small one, the air which you inject is sufficient enough. Now, the first and foremost thing in a Descemet detachment in a cataract surgery is to identify it. The moment you have not identified, you may have just caught hold of the Descemet and you have just extended it to a larger extent. Now, larger the extent, if the detachment goes beyond 180 degree, the chances of attaching only by air, because at that point of time you have to be very cautious about removing the viscoelastics. Now viscoelastic has to be completely removed and air has to be injected from that area where the Descemet is intact, not from the wound side, because from the wound side you have detached it. My point is to focus that whenever you inject air, you inject it from the area where the Descemet is attached, so that the air creates a tamponade for the rest of the. You can even have a tight tamponade. That does not matter. Even if the IOP is high for a day and you can manage it by anti-glaucoma medications, done. In DSEC, we have very high pressures. We just keep an eye that the patient is not restless. There is a question of the lenticule being misplaced. Here you have a hanging Descemet. Supposingly, if it detaches even after air injection, you have an option of injecting C3F8 from the attached area, from the side where the Descemet is attached into the anterior chamber. That suffices. The edema remains there for a little longer, but 100% it suffices if the endothelium is fine.
So the number of questions have ended. Maybe a couple of things I would like to take your view on. Do you use OCT for your phakic ICLs, vault measurements? How do you find them? The tricks?
Definitely. This presentation of OCT was basically, he requested me while I was driving my car back to home 2 hours back. Now I had this in, I said that I can give you a clinical implications. I keep on adding upon. So so this is one of the most important one which you said, which was already not there. So I think Satyajit is exposed right now. But I said, yes, definitely I can give that for the benefit of the PGs, whatever we can discuss and cumulatively.
I think that's what I just wanted your thing on that. And another thing which probably is a good thing which OCT can help us is understanding the IOL positioning.
Yeah.
Post cataract surgery, if you have some unexplained visual symptoms like unexplained aberrations, so OCT can actually help us find out whether the lens is in the bag or partly in the bag or
Partly in the bag. Yeah.
is it.
Yeah. Definitely.
So the tilt can be actually, it can be picked up in the OCT.
So
That's
that is
probably
what
one
I said,
good
that this is a
indication.
technology. What I said, that this technology, the use of this technology is going to expand.
Yeah.
It is going to expand because of the refinements what we are continuously doing. Continuously, whatever you are doing, you are trying to follow it up with a non-invasive technology which is of use, of ease.
Correct.
So, and that gives you some result, and then you interpret, and definitely things come out. So that's the beauty of this technology. I would say this people have, PGs have to imbibe this, because again, something will add upon to it only.
Correct. Correct.
In fact, a lot of data is going to come out of the tear film thickness from the newer modules that are coming in anterior segment OCT. They're going to measure the tear film thickness now over the cornea.
Yeah, it is coming.
It will help us in dry eye management.
Things are already in pipeline. Datas are there, but once the datas are sufficient enough to decisively give a conclusion, then only you say that this pattern says this. So this technology is being continuously, that is, this being a non-invasive technology is of great use. One of its advantage, I would say.
In fact, the newer biometry machines will have OCT inbuilt in them. One of the companies have actually done it. Yeah, inclusive of OCT.
We'll be more technically dependent upon. I think later on we may be just left out for interpreting, and things will be done by the machine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was.
Times are changing very fast. Technologically, it is helping us a lot, definitely. That doesn't mean that it's not helping in giving better results. I mean, predictable and better results. That's one of the important uses of this technology.
Another thing I would like to ask you, sir, how do you find Salzmann nodular degeneration common in corneal OPDs or in general OPDs? Salzmann's nodular degeneration.
Occurrence.
Yes. You see them, especially the cataract population. If they come to you with a cataract and a Salzmann along with it. So would you like to share some insights on that?
Salzmann, BSK, and spheroidal commonly encountered. This is what I have felt in the OPDs. Salzmann, spheroidal, and BSKs. These are very frequently seen, and very frequently, I mean, it's not that daily you are seeing, frequently seen. I mean, oftenly you are passing those, but the others, Arcus, I am setting aside Arcus. Arcus is some kind of a thing that, yeah, you have a hair, you have a hair. So Arcus is there, it is there. So you don't look at that as a degenerative thing. Definitely when it is there in slightly younger population, then we definitely have a look onto that, why so early. And as I mentioned that, yes, certain systemic investigations are warranted in those patients. We just say that lipid profile Karalo and then go ahead with those things if something is there. So it's fairly common. Salzmann, BSKs, and that's spheroidal. Yeah. I didn't discuss that spheroidal over here specifically because of its etiological. I didn't categorize in the peripheral degeneration. That's why. Otherwise, I would have gone into detail of that also.
There's one. Just continuing to this question only, what age group do we call Arcus juvenilis? Till what age? I think
juvenilis is usually, what we clinically consider, it is said less than 40. Clinically, if it's before the presbyopic age, if I am seeing, so that gives me a concern. before the presbyopia case straight away.
Yeah. One more question I think has come. No.
Questions are unending. People are
Yeah.
there.
I think questions have stopped now.
Stopping of questions indicate two things. Either the questions have stopped or the things have logged off. But yes, hopefully people have shown their interest.
Yeah.
They need to know these things, and dystrophies, degenerations, PGs have to. As a matter of fact, we are discussing it right now. So that itself explains its clinical implications.
Yeah.
The worst ones are the BSKs, I would say, in cases of children, whereby, I mean, you want to intervene, but you know that it's such a kind of a recurrent uveitis that any kind of a surgical thing, intervention, things will go downhill. The patient is also having a complicated cataract. All those kind of things are there. So those are the worst ones. Any special thing which you would like to, I mean, share out? And even Satyajit, looking silently.
So, one thing that I noticed in your presentation, you said when a foreign body comes, you do anterior segment OCT. Do you always do this, or
no?
I know it is scientifically it is important,
No.
but you do it for all foreign bodies on corneal
No.
foreign bodies. You do
no. What we do is that in those kind of, see, what we have been doing, we do that only. Now the thing is that when you look on the slit lamp, you very well assess whether it is in anterior stroma or slightly protruding. There are certain situations where the corneal foreign body, whether it has penetrated or not, those dicey cases whereby you think that your intervention in the OPD can jeopardize or suddenly need you to put pad and bandage and ask the patient to come next day in the OT. In those cases, you just put the patient on OCT and see to what extent so you safely call the patient in the OT to remove the foreign body, even if there is a small perforation or things like that has happened, you can very well manage that. So that is a very well quantified approach whereby you do that OCT, which is non-invasive, that doesn't add on anything trouble to the patient, and definitely guides you to a better situation.
Absolutely. Okay. Sagar, you have any more questions?
Nothing, sir. Nothing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nilesh. Wonderful presentation. Go ahead, Sagar.
Thank you.
No, I was just saying that this presentation helped us also brush a lot of things which we had learned long time back.
Yeah.
So it was very nice.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you. I tried to make it crisp, and I mean, though this degeneration and dystrophy parts are such that many times
very dry.
Initially are dry, makes you feel sleepy, but I tried to just pick out the important points where you need to focus, and so that the postgraduates can have an interest and imbibe the max.
Correct. Very nice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nilesh Mohan, for the wonderful presentation, for the wonderful interaction. I would also like to thank Dr. Sagar Bhargav for being with us through all these days, and especially for today's moderation. Today we have completed the 4th module of our ongoing PG initiative. We have finished squint, we have finished retina, glaucoma, and cornea. And beginning 20th July to 4th August, we will be doing 1 week each of cataract first, and then uvea, and then neuro-ophthalmology. So I'd like to request, and now all these presentations are available online also. The cornea module will be available in a day or two. The squint, retina, glaucoma, all the presentations are now available online. A big thanks to Intas Pharmaceuticals for doing all that. So all the presentations which were made, you want to revise them, you can always go back to YouTube. If you type, I was just trying to type ABI Institute and I saw all the presentations coming. So if you type that, you will be able to see all the presentations and you can revise that also. In case you are not able to find it, you can write it on, you can write to me at eyesinha@gmail.com, eyesinha@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you the YouTube links. So today we thank all the postgraduates also who have been there with us every day in the evening. And now for 2 weeks, we will have a break. And then from 20th July to 4th of August, we will have the final leg of the 5th, 6th, and 7th module. Once again, thank you, Dr. Sagar. Thank you, Dr. Nilesh. Thank you, Intas. Thank you, Manish ji, Chandrasekhar ji, who have worked so hard in bringing this all together and making a video library on all the topics which will be there for a long, long time to come for all the postgraduates to revise every time. And once again, thanks to all the postgraduates also who have made this program very successful. Thank you so much. Goodbye and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.